Goodness.
Welcome back to Unfiltered, Unqualified.
Woo!
It is such a blessing to finally be back together. It's been like, what, 2, 3 months, y'all? Way too long. Our kids are like, what have happened in your lives? We have no idea. They're probably the most influential months of our entire lives, honestly.
Mhm.
Sorry, y'all. But
Yeah, but we don't need to talk about that. I think we're fine.
that's right. Yeah, the
Part of
important
the
part is we're
process.
all back together. So excited. Not only are we back together, but we have kind of a fun current event topic to talk about today. We're talking about polygamy, and more specifically, we'll get to some thoughts that John Taylor had on polygamy as well. So make sure that you buckle your seatbelts, and all your wives have their seatbelts buckled as well. And we,
All 8 of them.
yeah, right.
For Nephi 20.
Yeah, 20.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was so funny. I learned today one of my uncles works at a university in the South in Texas, and I guess everyone calls him Norman at work because he's a normal Mormon because he only has one wife. So we got so we got some personal connections with this topic, as well as Reagan, right?
Mhm.
Caleb's wife is what, one generation removed from polygamy. Like her grandpa was going to be the next prophet of the FLDS until he died. But he and his wife are, yeah, but practicing believers. Did I ever count that right, Tanner?
I don't know, actually.
Oh, well,
Yeah, I
I'm
don't know
pretty
about
sure
the
that's what they
prophet
told me.
aspect, but I do know that she's at least one generation away.
Mhm.
Because I think it was her
I'm
mom's mothers that were polygamists.
Sounds like you guys aren't as good of friends with Reagan as I am, because I'm pretty sure that's what she said. But yeah, if her grandpa hadn't died, he was like the next in line in seniority, basically. So, without further ado, I will share my screen, and I'm trying to do it in a little bit different of a format actually this time. Instead of doing a slideshow, we're just going to do like a progressive document and just kind of work our way through these different points here today. So probably the most,
Get into it.
yeah, okay, let's get into it. Indeed. Okay, so starting off, this timeline is very, very beastie. You guys feel free. Oh wait, this document is shared with you. It's in the drive, but let me resend it so you can open up. I wanted you to be able to follow along. There's the chat button. There we go. Okay. So yeah, I'll wait a second so you have a chance to hop on in.
There it is. Cool.
Very nice. Okay. So, and Nephi, sorry, I didn't see you weren't in yet. So, I'll get started. Okay. So, what? How about you guys recount for me first, actually, before we jump right into this? What's your narrative, your understanding, your story of polygamy with the church? Like its ending. What's the story in like 2 sentences?
Like how it ended in like the 60s, or what, not the 60s, like the late 80s or 1880s.
Yeah.
I was about
Um,
to say, wait, 100-year difference there.
yeah. I think that's pretty much it. That the government said that they couldn't do that, and then they were like, okay, then we will stop. And then they still kind of did it on the side. That's my entire understanding of how it stopped.
Yeah, I would say that my 2 sentences are pretty much the same thing, that God showed the prophet what would happen if he continued the practice of polygamy, given the current standing of society at the time, and so he decided to end polygamy.
Well, that is a beautiful narrative, and that was pretty much my understanding, thoughts as well, except for Tanner, you already had a little more in depth in your description than I realized and knew when you're saying that they were still doing it on the side. So that's some spicy and interesting and exciting part of this timeline, I guess, that we can kind of get through. Um, my goal is not to read this, but mostly to like summarize it and scroll through it. And if at any point you guys want to be like, oh, stop, or oh, look, when I was going through it, this is something interesting that I saw. That's how I'm planning on using this. If that sounds good to you guys, I get like a head shake for yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Nephi. Oh, actually, he's frozen. He's probably shaking his head.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, there we go.
I'll try turning off my camera. Maybe that'll help.
No, don't do that. We'd rather have
We
your
want
beautiful face
you-
even if it's frozen.
Okay.
Okay.
As long as it's not ugly.
Okay.
Never
Right.
Nephi.
Oh, thanks, man.
Okay. So, yeah. So polygamy started, and I mean, this is a topic for another podcast. Just some interesting side stuff with polygamy. To this date, we don't have descendants from Joseph through polygamous wives, so that's interesting. He also was marrying, like the vast majority of his wives, and especially like his early lives or whatever, were already pregnant. Um, Interesting because at the time it was considered super taboo to have sex when pregnant. It was thought to be really unhealthy. So that's a interesting side topic presentation that Don Bradley, a great historian, has done a lot of work on, showing that most likely Joseph was marrying these women because he wanted their descendants to be in the sealed family, but he wasn't, I guess, just trying to have more sex, basically. So interesting tidbit on the origins of polygamy. As you guys see and know, the U.S. government around in the 60s was really starting to crack down hard and being like, hey, we like this is an abomination, abhorrent, yada yada. Let's see. We even got an interesting Supreme Court case that said that Mormons, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, can have a right to believe in polygamy, but they can't practice it. So there's
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, isn't that interesting? That like difference, which I mean, I guess like it makes sense, right? Like I assume we would say that we believe you can do XYZ harmful thing, but as long as you don't do the harmful thing, we're not going to stop you, right? So kind of an interesting, at least that's how I interpret it, right? The perceived harmful thing. So yeah,
Yeah, from a
interesting.
legal front, I'd say yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So 80s, early 80s, the church really starts to crack down more, really trying to find church leaders practicing polygamy. John Taylor is the president of the church, and he's in hiding for, I don't remember if it's most, but I think it's most of his presidency. He's in hiding that whole time. And in 1886, he gives a revelation which kind of kicked off the topic for tonight. We'll read that revelation later. But this revelation talked about the new and everlasting covenant, and it is interpreted by the fundamentalists, the FLDS, as plural marriage, and that should never be taken away. So that's kind of the spiciness of this topic. That not only has the church was the church practicing polygamy, but that they got a revelation saying that polygamy will never go away. That's different from other prophecies versus like I don't know, like tithing, right? Tithing has, I guess you could say, had different forms, like whether it's consecration versus 10%. It's as if, my understanding is this is interpreted as if the prophet said that you will always pay 10% and that will never change, which is a very different kind of vibe, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So John Taylor dies. Wilford Woodruff is now in the presidency, and he starts to tell people that we, like with more pressure, we need to probably stop on the polygamy thing. And it's actually not until we send off our first senators to Congress that were polygamists that Congress was really like, look, we have all this evidence. Oh, here we go down here. This is now the, oh, okay, never mind. Sorry, I skipped it, y'all. I skipped it. Woodruff then did the first manifesto, key first, because there's actually three. But he did the first manifesto saying, yeah, we no longer practice polygamy and we will abide by the law. And I am not going to lie, after reading it, I thought that this was a done deal because it's like really intense, right? He's like, I heard a rumor that someone did a polygamous marriage in one of our endowment houses. I tore down the entire endowment house based on the rumor. Like, that's a big deal, right? Seems like they're pretty serious. However, not so much, because literally days after, we have records of apostles still performing plural marriages. And it was still an ongoing thing. This is where, what you said, Tanner, to where it basically became the accepted mainstream, to where it's still okay, but you just got to do it behind closed doors. We got even a whole secret code system to send people to Mexico or Canada. And yeah, the number of approved plural marriages actually goes up. Like, this is all after the first manifesto. Is that fascinating? You're like, I was like, wait, what?
Like, you're supposed to stop, man.
Yeah, yeah.
That's insane.
So this is where the fundamentalists are coming from, to where they're like, oh, we understand that the church is feeling some political pressure, some political heat, but we understand that, like, wink, wink, nod, nod, we're still doing polygamy. You know?
That's so crazy.
Yeah. So John Taylor is, I just forgot his name. Oh yeah, John. That's funny. John Taylor is John Taylor's son, and so it's John Taylor Jr. He discovers this revelation, the revelation that he gave in hiding. Okay, actually, a little more context with John Taylor. He was straight up telling bishops that they needed to practice polygamy, like for their salvation. Like he was all aboard the polygamy train. So at this time, like polygamy was going up, even the number of sealings were going up. John Taylor discovers this prophecy that we will never stop doing polygamy is a fundamentalist take, and I say that because after we read it, you can see how there's some interpretation wiggle room in there. However, when the 1900s, or no, this is the 2000s, right? I always mix that up. I think that's the 20th century, right? 1903. So in the 20th century, we send our first senator to Congress, and that's when all the senators are like, oh, look at the new guy. And Congress's interest in polygamy really has a big uptick again. And that's when they do big investigations again, and they find that polygamy is still going strong in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they really crack down hard. Because of this, the church now releases its second manifesto, and it's spicy. Not all the apostles agree with it, and it's again seen as like a political, oh yeah, nod, nod, wink, wink. We understand. We got to do this, but this isn't really what we believe. Narrative kind of going on. So, because it's still not gone, the church now goes to new lengths than before, really, and start cracking down hard. They start excommunicating people. They are monitoring the mail, trying to find who's engaging in polygamous marriages. They yeah, basically they just start enforcing, whereas before they definitely were not. And this is what really starts to push the fundamentalists from being a like integrated part of the church to, okay, we have to do our own thing now. Is when the church, when the leadership really was like cracking down, throwing people in jail. There's um, there was a time that it actually became enforced. So yeah, that we lost members of the 12 apostles from this. It was spicy stuff. And I
That
remember
is so
Taylor.
crazy. Like,
Yeah, right. This is
to have such an
1905.
issue to divide people with, like, divide the apostles. That's insane.
Yeah, yeah, it was super interesting, super spicy. Um, let's see. The oh yeah, this guy Francis Lyman. He was kind of set up as the church's, I don't know, if you want to have a bureau of investigation, that's now this guy. He's the
Man,
one who
that's not
was
a great
sent
person
out
there.
leading. I mean, he was just the one sent out to do
His
hundreds.
name is Lyman. He's just gonna lie, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No, just kidding.
Um, yeah. So super spicy, super interesting. Um, this is. It's also interesting that around this time. Okay, so around this time, this revelation, remember this John Taylor revelation about polygamy? It actually got into the church historian's office in 1909, and that's kind of important because later the church is going to deny that it exists. But
Mhm.
it's actually not surprising they did that because most likely people didn't actually know that it was in the church office. Is is the most likely take, most likely fair take, I'd say. But what kind of I think is kind of the pinnacle of this whole movement of actually enforcing the church's manifesto from when was it? When was the first? Okay, so in 1890. So basically, this has been like a 20-year process from when the first church said no to them actually starting to enforce. I think it's this one right here, John Taylor. So John Taylor's son was excommunicated, and in his like excommunication process, he like had his father's revelation saying that the church needs to practice polygamy and we will never take polygamy away. And he's like, look, I have this, you can't excommunicate me. And they did. So it was super debated whether that was a legit real thing though, just so you know, in his excommunication process. It wasn't like, oh yeah, we accept that's the thing. It was more so like, yeah, we don't even think that's real.
You
But
made it
still
up.
fascinating. Yeah, yeah, something more like that. So super fascinating. Most of my information from this is coming from, oh, I feel bad. I should give the guy credit. Let me find him real fast so I can um give him credit. Uh he's a member of the church and um makes is a historian and who his study and discipline and books are all about Mormon history, and I love them. I think they're super fascinating videos.
Were you
Let's
thinking of Don
see.
Bradley or someone else?
I also love Don Bradley so much. Um, but this guy is Benjamin Park, Professor Benjamin Park. That's who most of this information is coming from. Just so y'all know, I will copy and paste links to my sources at the end of this document. I don't think I did that before, so I'll do that live once we're done going through it. But um, okay, but here we go. So 1920s, 30s, people this revelation was circulating around among members. And so isn't that crazy? In my mind, I didn't realize like 1920s, so this is pretty recent stuff. That's when people are like, hey, we the church is cracking down on us. We can no longer practice polygamy inside the church. If we're going to do this, we need to go do our own thing. And there was a claim that John Taylor even secretly ordained men to make sure that polygamy was carried on, like basically a polygamy task force. um, so this is crazy. This is like, man, this would be a great episode of like The Crown or something. All the drama and politics and just institutions. Ultimately, I think is just an inherent part of imperfect people trying to run an organization.
Yeah.
1933, we now have an over 40, right? Yeah, over 40-year process. Wait, was it 80 or 90? 90. Okay. Over 40 years, the church has been trying to stamp out polygamy now. It was not a first manifesto and yes, sir, everyone fall in line. No, this is now an ongoing 40-year struggle going on. And that's when we now get the third manifesto. If I remember right, this first and second manifestos were like official manifestos. This third one, I think, is just like coined. It was just like kind of a landmark talk, but I don't think it's like coined a manifesto. But it's just kind of like the effect it had and how it's viewed. By J. Reuben Clark, he talks about that it was to be read in every church service. So very manifesto-y, right? Denounced polygamy, denying church leaders ever sanctioned it after 1890, and threatening to excommunicate. So, oh, here we go. I guess I was saying too early. So we got the big crackdown. This is where we're working with police. We're doing post office to censor mail, library censoring books. It is full-blown war. This has been going on for 40 years. The church is like, we're done. Time to finish this off. And that's what sparks the fundamentalist movement. So fascinating, right? Any questions so far? I know we went through a lot of stuff, and I said I don't want to basically read it, and I feel like I basically did that. But man, I just feel like it's interesting.
No,
Yeah,
it
I think
is.
it definitely helps to inform like the entire process leading up to it, because I definitely didn't realize it was this involved for the years following it.
Or that there was like such resistance against it.
Yes. Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's been so fascinating to learn about. So the fundamentalist movement occurs, and the church came out with a public statement, I think in the third manifesto, saying that this so-called revelation from John Taylor does not exist. It's not real. Even though, if you remember, where was it? They actually even had a copy in church archives. I don't remember what year that happened, but I think that was like a couple decades ago. So the best explanation, I'd say a good and quick explanation on this for why it's like most likely legit. Oh, share this tab instead. There we go. It's most likely legit that the church was not lying about that. Is basically here. This is on Fair, and basically, actually, I'll have you guys read this. I'll let you be involved more. You guys just want to bounce each paragraph real fast?
Do you want to go first, or I can go first? Between the years of 1886 and 1933, the existence of the revelation was uncertain to many. At some point, Elder John W. Taylor, a then member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and President John Taylor's son, located the physical copy of the revelation among his father's things, and copies of the revelation were passed around to certain individuals. A week before the first manifesto was issued, Elder Heber J. Grant recorded in his journal that John W. Taylor had told the quorum about the revelation. Elder Taylor then showed a copy of it to the Quorum of the 12 during his excommunication hearing in 1911. He was excommunicated for continuing to fight against the first and second manifestos. Some church leaders believed in its authenticity, while others disputed it. It was rejected as being authoritative by the Quorum of the 12, and the manifestos were upheld.
The first presidency released a statement in June 1933 calling it a purported revelation and saying it was not located in the church archives. At the time of the statement, that was true. Joseph Fielding Smith, who was then both an apostle and an assistant historian of the church, had a copy, but it was not the original document, and it was kept in the church historian's office rather than in the official First Presidency's church archives. Other copies were reportedly housed in the Special Documents Department of the Historian's Office, which was also a separate archive. Thus, the first presidency statement appears to have been another carefully worded denial, like those made during the early days of plural marriage.
Approximately 1 month after the statement was released, Frank Y. Taylor, another son of President Taylor, gave the original revelation to the first presidency. While in the church's possession, the document has been made available to historians for research purposes, though its authenticity was still disputed by some church leaders. At some point in the 2000s, over a century after it was received, the revelation was finally confirmed to be authentic through handwriting analysis and other processes. In June 2025, was digitized and put on the church's online library of historical documents.
You want me to read this last one too?
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Should the church have announced it had the revelation in its possession after it was received? Perhaps. But with fundamentalist Mormon sects claiming it gave them authority and using it to suggest the mainstream church was in apostasy, the decision not to broadcast it is understandable, especially as it was disputed and could not be fully authenticated for over a century.
So, long story short, you can see the power struggle going on. Due to this power struggle going on, whether people thought it was legit or not, because yeah, the document existed, we had it, but most people probably didn't really know we had it, and most people who knew we had it probably didn't think it was necessarily true. So there's just some wordcraft going on. You got to cover your bases when there's a power struggle going on and be very precise. So yeah, that's how to interpret the straight up denial, is that I'm sure there's many who thought it was not legit, and it was also true that it's not in our archives. Wink, wink. Does that make sense? Any further discussion that people want to talk about? I just thought those. At first, I was like, "Whoa, that's some straight up lies, right?" And now it's like, "Oh, it's just crafted lies."
No, it's all a conspiracy, Joseph. What else have they been hiding from us?
That tithing only is supposed to be 9%.
I knew it. I mean, I feel like
Okay.
it's just like any other sort of big organization type of thing, to where it's like, okay, yeah, they're going to be choosy with their words, especially when they're being so divided as like losing a lot of their base. So I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
Honestly, to me, this seems like it's the biggest shift in the church identity since Joseph Smith, like actually being brought into being. I feel like this, and then the most subsequent aspect would be like President Kimball and giving blacks the priesthood. But then again, I guess I'd have to double check everywhere else just to see where. But yeah, at least to my knowledge, like, it makes sense why it's like such a shocking thing, because it seemed like most things were generally pretty homogenous, pretty much the same with how it was before, up until this big mic drop of a revelation.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there, that there's definitely Nephi's when it comes to prophets and prophecy, and then there's also Omni's, Nephi's influence in book, Omni, like, this is a pretty fundamental, this is a big shift moment time. Yeah, lots of big deals. Okay. So yeah, that's how the fundamentalists started. Is this revelation is basically a Magna Carta for them. I said that weird, Magna Carta for them. It's like their foundational document that was really, really near and dear to their hearts. Obviously, the church endorses it now. Even though, so the reason why it's interesting is because just like barely, they put it on their website. That's the explanation there is they just have lots of documents and stuff that they're digitizing. Not super surprising, because even before they put it up on their website, yeah, Elder Christofferson. Oh no, sorry, wrong. Even before we put it on their website, they'd already put it out in Saints, and they have been in literature before then. So now it's just this the revelation is now just very easily accessible to the public. But this is an interesting talk we can come back to as well later. I think I have this reference for later, but this is a talk on what makes exactly official doctrine, and so this will be something that we can come back to. But yeah, it was just a couple weeks ago. Just a couple weeks ago that the Revelation was digitized and put up there. Here's our cast of characters, all the people involved, and next, now we got the events. Oh wait, is this how's this different? Oh, this is mostly the timeline for specifically just the Revelation itself. We see how, yeah, there's lots of persecution going on. John Taylor was in hiding, a fugitive. He gives this revelation about 9 months before his death, when there's intense pressure from the federal government and questions of church leaders about the continuation of plural marriage. This is important because this is, I feel like, the biggest claim for why you can say the Revelation is about polygamy. And I think we've gone over most of this timeline. Okay, so why was it never canonized? Some context. Well, we got lots of discussion for here, but this is mostly just background again. So it's hard to say whether he would have or how that went down. As you just learned, he died 9 months later, and he was in hiding the whole time, you know? So, and on top of that, like when we're in the middle of receiving scrutiny from the federal government about polygamy, it's not necessarily a great time to push for a broad general public policy adaptation doctrine of polygamy, right? So there's really good reasons for why this wasn't pushed to be sustained by a vote of common consent in the beginning. Let's see, but nonetheless, because the Revelation never went through that process, it's not canonized. You know, we shouldn't look at it as having that same kind of oomph as things in D&C. And and just, I don't know, the whole idea of, well, okay, yeah. So the whole idea of canonization, that's a big discussion for us to have. Okay,
I
so
guess
reasons.
my question is, like, I guess I was always taught that the prophet got the revelations, and then that was just universal truth. So that's not what we believe.
Great question, Tanner. That is my understanding. And you know what? Let's do this. I take it back. Instead of waiting for down here, I think these are actually questions to discuss at a time.
Oh, sorry, I'm bad.
Additional questions. No, you're good. I'm saying I'm bad. So I forgot. Because I prepared this weeks ago and we rescheduled this over and over. So now that I remember, I'm pretty sure I did actually want to discuss it as we go. So the timeline, does anyone have any last thoughts or questions about this summarized timeline, basically, for the Revelation?
No, that makes sense. Very well done.
Okay, then let's actually read the timeline. Not the timeline. Let's actually read the Revelation now, and then we'll jump into those discussions about it.
Okay.
Feel free to open it up on your computers as well. You want to, so you can more easily dive into it. I'll read it this time. It's not too long.
Just so you know, Joseph, it's not shared on your screen though.
Oh, thank you. Share this tab instead. Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
This is Revelation given to President John Taylor, September 27th, 1886, copied from the original manuscript by Joseph F. Smith Jr., August 3rd, 1909.
So there could be some... Wait, so this isn't the original document. This is a...
Oh, sorry. The original stuff is over here. Is like the previous...
Oh, I see. There's
pictures.
Like whole other letters. I see. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. This is just the easiest to read, all on one page. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Continue.
Yeah. No, you're good. My son John, You have asked me concerning the new and everlasting covenant and how far it is binding it upon my people. Thus saith the Lord, all commandments that I give must be obeyed by those calling themselves by my name. Nevertheless, they are revoked by me or by my oh, unless they are revoked by me or by my authority. And how can I revoke an everlasting covenant? For I, the Lord, am everlasting, and my everlasting covenants cannot be ab- abrogated. How am I saying? I'm saying that wrong. Cannot be
Abrogated.
abrogated. Thank you. Cannot be abrogated nor done away with, but they stand forever. So have I? Well, okay, we'll take it apart more later. Have I not given my word in great plainness on this subject? Yet have not great numbers of my people been negligent in the observance of my law and the keeping of my commandments? And yet have I borne with them these many years, and this because of their weakness, because of their perilous times. Furthermore, it is more pleasing to me that men should use their free agency in regard to these matters. Nevertheless, I, the Lord, do not change, and my word and my commandments and my law do not. And as I have heretofore said by my servant Joseph, all those who would enter into my glory must and shall obey my law. And have I not commanded men that if they were Abraham's seed and would enter into my glory, they must do the works of, oh, wait, and have I not said, sorry, this is a little wordy, a little hard to keep track of, but it makes sense, I think, once we'll piece it together. And have I not commanded men that if they were Abraham's seed and would enter into my glory, they must do the works of Abraham? I have not revoked this law, nor will I, for it is everlasting. And those who will enter into my glory must obey the conditions thereof. Even so, amen. Ta-da! That's it. Big reveal. So if I were to summarize it myself, do some paraphrasing, I'll just keep to new and everlasting covenant because it's a little bit divisive whether you think this means polygamy or whether you think this just means eternal marriage. But so John is saying, hey, my son, you've been asking me about the new and everlasting covenant and how binding is it? Like this law, how much is this a commandment that we need to push as a people? Well, I tell you that if you take my name upon you, um, you must obey all my commandments, right? Unless I get rid of them. And I can't get rid of everlasting covenants, can I? No, because I'm everlasting and the covenant is everlasting. So you can't ever get rid of it. They stand forever. Yeah. This is plainness, right? This is easy. However, there have been a lot of my people that are negligent to observe my law and to keep my commandment. And I feel like he's basically saying, but because they're weak, because you've had a lot of persecution, and because I want people to choose to follow me with their agency, I have been like merciful, but my commandments don't change. They're everlasting. And so I say unto you, my servant Joseph, if you want to enter into my glory, you need to obey my law. And if you want to um,
Enjoy Abraham's blessings. Do what
thank
Abraham
you.
did.
Yeah, you need to be like Abraham, obey my laws. Yeah, exactly. For it is everlasting. Those who enter into my glory must obey the conditions thereof. So if you want to set up, man, this would have been great. I should have totally done this. My logic teachers would have been so proud. But if you want to set up some like lines of logic, I feel like you could basically say that this is saying the new and everlasting covenant is an eternal law that's not going to go away. I'm lenient or merciful or forgiving because I know you've had a lot of persecutions and I want men to actually follow me. But if you want to come to heaven, if you want to be with me, you need to obey the the new and everlasting covenant. That's how I read it. Is anyone opposed? Anyone want to make any amendments to do that process?
No, I think that's a good summary.
Okay. Well, with that then, let's scroll back down these. Okay,
We can't see
implication.
if you're showing anything.
Oh, yep. Thank you. Let's actually change this order here, and let's talk about this first. Why the revelation might be talking about polygamy and why it might not be, because that is a pretty big difference, right?
Because it doesn't ever say polygamy. It doesn't talk about wives or anything. It just says everlasting covenant.
Correct, which is very, yeah, it's just very divisive because you can interpret it either way, and there's two very invested parties in this: the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the FLDS movement, that both really want it to be one way, you know. So, I'll just kind of paraphrase these then. So the fundamentalists interpret it as the new and everlasting covenant. And what are kind of the reasons for it? Well, I think some of the biggest reasons for it is John Taylor is the one who gave this revelation. And we have like documentation that he was commanding bishops to enter into the new and everlasting covenant. He used polygamy and the new and everlasting covenant interchangeably all the time. And apparently at the time, that was kind of the norm. Another big reason why I think this document is most likely talking about polygamy is the fact that the church leaders at the time felt pressure to deny its existence. You know, there wasn't a debate over, for the people at the time, there wasn't a debate going on whether this was talking about polygamy or not. I feel like that's a big deal because that kind of shows the context of what they felt like it meant. For them, the debate was, oh, this isn't legitimate, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So my personal bias and full disclosure is I feel like the historical context, I feel like really strongly points to this revelation talking about polygamy. If God speaks to us in our own language, I think, and this was sent to John Taylor, assuming it's a legit revelation, I think that John Taylor was being told by God that if you want to get into heaven, you need to practice polygamy. I feel like I'm talking too much and my throat's getting sore. So if if y'all would like to bounce through these bullet points and give my voice a little break, that'd be great.
Yeah, no worries. I think that makes sense, though. I didn't realize that there were more communiques with John Taylor specifically, like referring to polygamy and the everlasting covenant. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, that's part of the historical context that we're removed from, right? Because for us, we like very specifically use the word polygamy when we're talking about polygamy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Or plural marriage or whatever the church wants to say. No, that does make sense. No, I think I agree with you. I think it probably is talking about polygamy in that sense. The bottom point is also interesting, saying that God can revoke commandments through his authority.
Yeah, let's share this tab back. Let's see here. That's right here.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they are revoked by me or by my authority. But then it's interesting because the next sentence he says, but I can't revoke this one because it's everlasting.
Mm-hmm.
But that's basically God saying, don't mess with what I say. I can mess with what I say, but not you, right?
Mm-hmm.
That
makes sense.
Do you have 2 cents you want to say? I actually talked with Nephi about this earlier, Tanner, when I had worked on this a while ago, and we had a lot of talk about this. What's your current thoughts and feelings on it now, Nephi? I know that you didn't have nearly as much context at the time, and you still don't. None of us really have a ton compared to these fancy historians, but please fire away.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate all the effort and work you put into this. I definitely learned a lot. Wow. I think I agree with you that, like, terminology wise, I don't think that they really used polygamy or that kind of stuff more, that term, as much as probably new and everlasting covenant. I think that makes most sense rather than having the presentism come in. I do think, however, that the broader interpretation isn't necessarily wrong. Like, I think it's appropriate, as the scholar Brian Hales argued, that like, okay, well, new and everlasting covenant can also be a broader range, right? And that it's especially where he talks about the acts of Abraham, like, will you not do the actions of Abraham? I don't think Abraham's actions were dependent on him being a polygamist. As far as I know, he wasn't really even a polygamist in the same ways that we would term it as a polygamist. Like, yes, he had Ishmael with Hagar, but I don't think that's the same sense of new and everlasting covenant as even the people who would be receiving this, John Taylor and John Taylor, would be viewing it as. So I think that's part of what really brings me back to being like, okay, because he's talking about this, and what I see it as more of like a broader context, is it specifically and only about plural marriage, or is there something more here? And so I don't know. I think part of me wants to just say, I forget the specific term for it, but it's just like the idea that, well, the easiest answer makes the most sense, right? At the same time, just because two things are correlated doesn't make any causation, even though that's an easy explanation. And so I think there's probably both at play. At this point, I'm leaning more towards what was said before, though, that, yeah, it is about polygamy. So I'm still thinking about how the second plays a role in there, because if it is about polygamy, I feel like it seems uncharacteristic to have such a broad categorization as the actions of Abraham and just the broad sense of giving and taking commandments, when clearly, as we also saw with the revelation by the first manifesto, okay, like, at least the way that I view it, I don't see it as God revoking or abrogating polygamy, as much as I see it saying, hey, look, this is what's going to happen if you don't change your actions. And so maybe it is just careful word play on the church again. I don't know. But I do genuinely view that, okay, even if we take it in the context that this 1886, I believe, section is specifically talking about polygamy, I don't think that that directly conflicts with the subsequent revelation that polygamy is outside of the bounds of what God views as part of the new and everlasting covenant. It could just be not necessarily part of the practice that we do today.
So if I were to summarize both of y'all's opinions right now, as far as I understand, we're all kind of on board that we think the fundamentalists are nailing it, that this is meant to refer to the practice of polygamy, but we don't think you're crazy if you try to make the argument for otherwise.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
It's like in between where it's like just vague enough that it could be something else, but yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and with that, I will add on that, like, in my previous discussions with Joseph, I was more on the side of, no, it's not talking about polygamy. Like, I was like, yeah, I mean, it could be. I don't think it was. But especially with the further background that you've given, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes more sense.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to go a little more off of what you're talking about, Nephi, with Abraham too. This is one of the arguments that, like, historians will say that it's not talking about polygamy. Is it's just similar language with DNC 132, and I guess there's more consensus that DNC 132 is not inherently talking about polygamy. It's more about eternal marriage in general. And so, yeah, some of that similar language there, or like a reference to Abraham, doesn't have to mean polygamy, right? It could just be talking about how Abraham, yeah, it's the Abrahamic covenant. You're covenanting with God, follow him. But yeah,
I know that's one thing we talked about as well, though, that, I don't know, I'm intrigued if you studied this a little bit more as well with 132. Last time I remember, section 132 does discuss the new and everlasting covenant in the context of having multiple wives. It doesn't explicitly say that the new and everlasting covenant is entering into plural marriage, but it does say that, look, this is the new and everlasting covenant, like a little bit later, and then talking about plural marriage. And so to me, it still seems like there is certainly that connection, although maybe just as explicit.
Fair. I mean, That's a good point. If we had this podcast a couple weeks ago, I probably could have answered that better for you. Sorry, I do not recall.
No
Um,
worries.
that's
Homework,
on
homework
me
for
then,
all the
right?
many
I should have,
listeners out there.
yeah, I should have brushed up on it more. But ultimately, for me, I think the biggest argument for it talking about polygamy is just the way how people reacted to it. The fact that um, church members who thought it was a legit revelation were joining the FLDS movement, and the fact that members who weren't joining the LDS movement said that the revelation was a fake. I that to me is I think the biggest argument for it being understood as talking about polygamy. But interesting stuff, right? Very interesting stuff. Now, um, you know what? I think this instead, I think we've talked about this summary of this context more around it, right? Of why this was such a private revelation, why it didn't really circulate around, and how he died 9 months later and he was in hiding, yada yada. Let's go back to Christofferson's talk now. And I realize that we're pushing an hour already, which normally is the max that we do on these podcasts. So I'm not going to make us read this whole church talk, but if I were to quickly summarize it, basically Elder Christofferson says that you don't find our doctrine in a random quote from some church leader somewhere. It's found through like large consensus and adaptation of the church, and like through, or was it the vote of the sustaining by common consent. I should have pulled these sections of DNC up, but to where I'm pretty sure, let me see here, common consent DNC. Like whenever a new section of DNC is added, the whole church votes on it in general conference. I didn't really realize that nor that. John Taylor had 2 sections in DNC in the Swedish version of the Bible, if I remember right, and they were later removed. Interesting enough. I'm not sure what those sections were about, but going back to what you were just saying, Tanner, this would be a great podcast, separate podcast topic if you want to take it. How is doctrine made? Because it's not, thus saith the prophet, and boom, it is, unless it's Joseph Smith. I literally just listened to a podcast yesterday where Don Bradley was given access to lots of church records, and he basically said that pretty much what he was told is if you see like mass sustaining, whatever the law of common consent going on, then it's doctrine, or if it came from Joseph Smith, then it's doctrine. And that
Interesting.
really, yeah, and it really intrigued me. And I think it shows how not all prophets, not all times are equal, and not all times have the same purpose. And I think that one of Joseph Smith's roles was to be a layer down of the law restorer, you know. And yeah, there were times where he said things, and that's what happened. But other times where that's not the case. This week in Come Follow Me, y'all. What was it? This week in Come Follow Me, I think, if I remember right, I think Joseph wanted to have someone sustained in a calling, but the church voted against it, and it didn't happen. I don't remember what the vote was exactly, but he wanted to do something, and a vote happened, and it failed, and so it didn't happen. Like, I'm with you. It's strange. It's confusing. It's not. It doesn't always feel consistent. And I guess what it makes me think of is Elder Holland's talk about when he gave a talk about why we don't believe in a closed scripture of canon. And one of the things that he said, he might have even been quoting someone else, but one of the things that he said is that scripture points away from itself. That scripture is not to be the ultimate authority. These prophets, they are to point away from themselves. The authority is ultimately God, and you don't have a greater authority than your relationship with Him. You know, which feels blasphemous and strange, because I feel like ultimately the implications of that you're basically saying oh, if I got a revelation from God that's contrary to the prophet, then that's what I'm supposed to do, right? I mean, I feel like that's kind of what's being stated, but I'm also like, oh yeah, this is the question. Isn't that basically what's going on? Kind of.
I'm
I
not
don't
sure
know.
I'm understanding.
Weird. Yeah, I'm not sure if I am either. Basically, I'm thinking back on that test we took of like how orthodox of a member we are, and I think one of the questions was, will your personal revelation ever override what a prophet says? And I remember being like, no, of course not. But I think the more I've been thinking about it, the more I'm like, yes and no, because like if the prophet gives a talk on being charitable with your financial means and giving to the poor, and let's say you already give to the poor a lot, like I feel like to a degree you need to be an ultimate authority to interpret and understand, okay, this is not something I need to work on, right? There might be other things. And in a way, I feel like you're kind of setting yourself above the prophet there. That's your own, you're taking what the prophet is saying into account, but you have your direct relationship with God yourself and can receive revelation yourself. Does that make sense? Like if
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, not to quote the only other non having a consented by in the Doctrine and Covenants kind of a source, but when Joseph Smith said that we teach the church members correct principles and then they decide for themselves, right? I don't think that that's what he was meaning is by saying that, okay, now you're placing yourself in a higher position than the prophet, as much as the prophet is saying, look, yes, you are supposed to give of your means to the needy, to the poor, right? So then that's for you to interpret, okay, the correct principle is be charitable, give, right? And
Yeah.
then, especially in light of all the other things, as Elder Christopherson's talk describes, right? Like in Mosiah, where it talks about how don't give, like, give what you have. But if you don't have, then having the attitude or that desire to give is sufficient, right? That in your heart you would give. But in reality, no, like it makes sense that if you don't have, then don't give.
Hmm.
right,
I feel like, yeah, that's exactly
I
it.
I feel like I've been putting us in a bit of a rabbit hole, and I feel like y'all are pulling us out. So before I take us back even further, we're gonna continue on, and I'll just keep it as saying thank you for pulling us out of that. Um, let's jump to okay, yeah, here we go. Tanner, yeah, can a prophet speak scripture? Short
I
answer, I'd
mean,
say yes and no.
I don't think
If
they can.
President Nelson, if President Nelson came to me and said, God wants you to do this, I would think that's as authoritative as scripture. If he got up at the pulpit and said that the church, okay, this is maybe an example, and this kind of has to do with prophetic fallibility and might be a whole separate podcast, but something that I guess look at this, I'm going to combine all three of these here. Something that this whole polygamy thing really makes me have a little bit of a head spin is just this idea of set doctrine. And so it makes me wonder, okay, if President Nelson got up there and said now the church is going to endorse gay marriages, what would that mean to me? What would I feel like and what would that think? A lot of the people who joined the FLDS movement were people who had suffered through years of prison and persecution because they were polygamists, because the church wanted them, asked them to be. You know, you were asked by the church to be a polygamist, is my understanding. It wasn't something you volunteered for. Like, how, man, how soul crushing, to be asked to do this and then be told to not to
Hmm.
anymore.
Well,
Like you
Sorry,
I
make
yeah.
all
guess
the changes in
real
your
quick
life,
on
and
that.
then yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't think that that's necessarily what was happening, though. As far as I understand it, like even going through the history, as you mentioned, it was to put an end to any future polygamous engagements. I don't think that the government was, I mean,
No,
I know
people
that
were
they
being
were
put in prison.
for already
Right.
practicing it then too, huh?
in the 30s. That's why they were monitoring the post office. They were sent. The church was working with authorities now. It had gone from a 180 where the church was now implementing the same techniques that the government had been putting on the church leaders. The church leaders were now putting on the people who were still practicing polygamy. It was like a crack down trying to root out the fundamentalists. Yeah, working with police, censoring mail. Like, isn't that crazy? You were put in prison because of what? Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's
Yeah, wow.
if if yeah. So or women in the priesthood, right? Both gay marriage and women in the priesthood. To me, I don't know because I wasn't there historically, but I feel like there was a lot of cultural understanding and even apostles teaching that blacks would never get the priesthood, right? And my understanding is that the the church has officially taught that gay marriages will never happen in the temple, and that women will never get the priesthood in the same way that the men do. I actually just finished listening to a book about women in the priesthood, and it's fascinating, y'all. Women have the familial priesthood through the endowment and marriage covenants, and that's the like real legit priesthood. The institutional priesthood is going to go away, and it's just temporary. But still, the institutional priesthood, the women are never going to have. Interesting stuff. Um, yeah, I don't know, but I feel like I did a pretty good job doing a bit of a general fire hose. But you guys have any thoughts on what this makes you? Any feelings you have on unchangeable doctrines?
Yeah, I think for things like gay marriage, especially, that one's a really tough one because in the modern eye and the modern view, and it's much more socially acceptable now. I don't think that that's going to change in the church. I think that it's going to continue to be restricted for temple ordinances and things, for sealings and all that, for that group of people. I think that there's just too much in the Old Testament, New Testament, Book of Mormon, D&C, where it's all about man and a woman, and modern revelation as well as about a man and a woman. So I have a hard time seeing how that one would be changed.
I definitely agree with you that I mean, I think I'd even say that just, yeah, but you're right. Foundationally, doctrinally, my understanding is gay marriage, that if what is our eternal role and like glory is like bringing to pass the immortality and eternal life of man. And as we know, you need two genders for life here. And my understanding is that plays gender is eternal, right? It's not just a physical temporary thing. So whatever essential role two genders play in the eternities, my understanding is, yeah, that's not something that can change. That because we want people to be happy, they will need to have two genders, essentially, I feel like is what the church says. But nonetheless, I just feel like there were probably people who thought the same thing about blacks in the priesthood, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so it just, or my goodness, nonetheless, it's pretty, it would be pretty fascinating, not fascinating, pretty, what's the word I'm thinking of? I'm just like, if I was one of those church members and I believe that John Taylor's prophecy was real, which is the next thing we're going to talk about, assuming it's real, what does it mean to be holding John Taylor's son? Holy cow, let's be him. I am John Taylor's son. I have a prophecy from the previous prophet just a couple years ago where he says that polygamy will never be taken away. And now the church is going to get rid of polygamy and excommunicate me over it. Like, whoa, yeah. Talk about something that seemed unchangeable. It specifically says this is not going to change.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, so again, this is as far as what this makes me feel. This really is like a thing that makes like feelings of doubt or like hard for belief at times, and that's where I feel like what's just important in the way to um, work with these things is to make sure you have things on both sides of your scale of faith. There's things that you don't understand and might be hard, might be frustrating, or just seem wrong at times. But it's when it's important to really understand and see the pros, the truths of the gospel as well. Why in the world are church members literally the best members in the world? Like, we're the healthiest, we contribute the most to society, we're the happiest. Why in the, like, how is the Book of Mormon here on this earth? You guys, the more I dig into the Book of Mormon, the more I'm like, it is the most mind-boggling miracle, and which strengthens my testimony, right? To where I'm like, look, I might not understand all these doctrines, but basically what I do know is that there is a God, and that He has sent servants to teach me how I can come back to Him. And life and society changes, and I believe in continuing revelation. So the teachings that I hear might not always be the same, but what I do know is that I think I will always be blessed for trying, you know, to follow whatever teachings I have at the time. So full disclosure, it would wreck my heart if, yeah, or wreck my understanding. That's a great word to say. It would wreck my understanding if the church were to say that we are now going to do gay marriages and that women would have the priesthood. This is what, it's funny. Women in the priesthood is actually one in particular that I have struggled with in the past, and I found out that statistically, men struggle with this more than women in the church. Kind of hoorah, I guess, for guys. But
Men struggle with the possibility that women have the priesthood, or men struggle that women don't have the priesthood in the same way that men do?
more men report that they struggle, but like doctrinally, it's confusing and a struggle for them for why women don't have the priesthood. More men wish that women would have the priesthood than women wish that they had the priesthood. Interesting. But yeah, so there's just things I don't understand and don't get, but I guess that's where I just feel like that scales of balance is so important. And man, learn about the Book of Enoch. Oh my gosh, stupid plain evidence for Joseph Smith. Like, we have on record scholars who say, the Book of Enoch doesn't make sense. Someday we'll find out how he did it. Like, talk about God of the gaps. That's the science equivalent of God of the gaps, when it shouldn't be possible for Joseph to not even translate. He just sat Emma down and said, write this. And he recites the Book of Enoch that hasn't even been translated into English yet. And then later we translate it and we're like, oh my gosh, he nails this. It's like, what? Like, those things don't make sense. That's how I deal with it the most, I guess I'd say, is just the scales, where there's things that I don't understand, but that's to be expected in any good thing in life. And so I just feel like on my scales of balance, I feel like there's enough things out there that make it to where I can't turn away, if that makes sense. I might not always understand the yoke that I'm called to bear. I might not always like it, but I just feel like it's the option. It's the only rod out there. The iron rod is the only thing to grab on. There's not something else, which at the same time kind of brings me joy, because I believe that there will be answers and there will be understanding, and that those things do happen. So
I think that's
Amen.
beautiful, man.
This has been a Joseph monologue tonight. We're at 75 minutes already. Holy cow.
Don't worry about the time, man.
Oh, good.
But I'd agree with you. It's the fundamentals that we can't understand, and if we do those, then we'll be okay.
Yeah, and not to say that we shouldn't dig into these. The more digging,
yeah,
the
we
better.
definitely should do this.
Yeah, which is definitely a cultural change for the church, and I will acknowledge. I think there's a lot of people who, man, the 50s, I think, was just a rough time. and for society in general, because that's when you had the CIA doing all those freaky psychedelic experiments, and when the government took out JFK. I think I might be a conspirator on that, y'all. I don't know if the government killed him, but it definitely hit stuff.
Elements in the government. Yeah.
So, so I think there's a lot of culture. Well, I guess that's what I'm saying. A lot of culturalness. It's not necessarily just the church. I think everybody at the time was a little shady. I guess it's just what you did. Everyone wanted to look perfect on the outside, and now I think it's exciting. We're in a culture and a time to where people want to see the dirty. It's expected, and that's great because acknowledging the dirty and acknowledging what's hard allows us to have a truthful point of progress, a truthful launching point, I think. But yeah, let me see here. What unchangeable doctrines? Ultimately, oh, okay, collective witness model. This, I guess, actually kind of goes back up here to speak of scripture. This is Jacob Hansen. He's a really big church YouTuber. This is his favorite thing. He's like, if a prophet ever says something, I look at my collection of witnesses, and if it contradicts the collection, then I'll probably turn him down. But if it's in not incongruence, if it's with the rest of the collective witness, then I'm like, great. So he'd say like blacks in the priesthood. He'd be like, Joseph Smith ordained blacks to the priesthood, and Moses married a black woman, so like he probably had black kids, right? And I don't know, and stuff. He's like, if you look over time, if you look over my collective witnesses, when McConkie says blacks are never going to have the priesthood, I think you're probably wrong. That's kind of how the collective witness model works, if that makes sense. And
That does make sense, yeah.
And I think it does have its problems, mostly when a prophet says, "Thus saith the Lord," and that's legit, right? Because mostly I feel like it opens you up to deny the prophet, maybe a little, but I don't know.
I mean, you look at the Pharisees; they could have as much collective witness as they want. They were still wrong,
Fair point. Yeah. So and maybe I'm straw manning his argument though, because I honestly don't know it super well, but I know he loves this, and he's a really big debater too. So he's definitely thought about it critically. But I think this whole polygamy shenanigans has some really interesting implications for what does it mean to obey the law of the land. It took the church 40 years to finally crack down on this, and if you look today, this is a fun mission story for you. I went out on my mission, Spanish speaking, in the United States. First day with the mission president, this question just kind of dawned on me. We're in the mission home, and he's like, "Does anyone have any questions?" I was like, I'm going to be serving Spanish speaking, and one of the baptismal interview questions is like, do you like obey the law of the land? Have you broken any laws? I don't remember the exact wording, but that's basically the question. Do you keep the laws? And I was like, since I'm Spanish speaking, like it's likely that I will work at times with people who are illegal immigrants in the country, correct? Across the border illegally. What do I do in that case? And like before I even finished the question, he shut me down and said, baptize him. And I was like, all right. He's like,
cool,
yeah,
there you go.
He's like, the church does not recognize artificial boundaries, laws of men as grounds to keep someone out of the covenant of baptism. So I was like, all right. So what does this mean to me? Obey the laws of the land. To me, I think this is again kind of like a sign of an institution to where the church, like any institution, you want and need laws and you want them to be obeyed. And like, look, China, I think we'd say we don't like their laws, but we do obey them, right? But mostly is my understanding. But
well, I mean, with I don't know if you've heard the more recent thing, all the branches and wards in China can't meet anymore right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And as far as I know, we aren't like telling them to meet in secret, right? But if people were trying to meet in secret, I don't know, what am I saying? I guess I'm saying there's definitely just a difference between an institution and individuals and the public facing part of the institution versus the private, hey, let's get stuff done.
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
So super interesting. And finally, did I put this in here? The conclusion? No, I didn't. Okay. Finally, I think kind of the big question, you guys, is so what? So assuming that this doctrine, assuming that this revelation was so I think you can take this a couple ways. Either this was a revelation from God, or this was John Taylor, I don't know, having an experience where he thought he was receiving revelation, but he wasn't. He was just feeling all hyped up and saying down what he wanted to teach because he was teaching it, right? Is that fair to say? A or
Mhm.
B? In the case of A, that it was a revelation from God, then the way I understand it is ultimately we are all going to need to enter into polygamy, get into heaven. And if that's the case, well, all right, I guess that's the case. What
Gotta talk with
understanding
Kyla
that,
about that one.
right? If we thought we were
A lot
gonna,
depend on what she wants.
yeah, we're gonna live in the South someday, and all of our coworkers are gonna watch this podcast episode when we're all big and famous, and they're all gonna be like, "See, the Mormons are nuts."
Well, we could have told you
Um,
that.
yeah, yeah. I don't have much more to say on that. Assuming that this is a legit revelation, I feel like that's what it means. So
Yeah.
that's
I
I guess
think the
that's
fact that
there.
it's not canonized, then I think we're not needing to worry about it right now. But yeah.
That's great. Yeah, don't need to worry about it. For conclusion. Let me share this. Only people can view. Yes. Okay, here sources. What heading? Heading 2. Okay, heading number 2. These are the sources that I used, and that's it. That's the slideshow, y'all. Got
Good
any
deal, man.
questions or thoughts or
No, I think you've put it together beautifully. I think that it makes sense. I now know the context of everything. Um, and yeah, whether or not it's a real revelation or not, I think that it's still something that we should know about and that our kids will want to know about. So thank you for putting
yeah,
this together, man.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Joseph. I think it's especially important to have these questions, yeah, because ultimately, whether this specific thing is doctrinal in the long term or not, like you guys said, right? That ultimately it's important to grapple with this, to have that wrestle of faith, as Enos describes, right? Because as long as we are intentionally progressing along that path, then I think it will draw us closer to God. And yeah, the questions can be hard, but I think that's part of what makes it worth grappling with. So thank you.
Yeah.
I think
The whole restoration
wonderfully
was
put
started
together.
with a question.
Oh yeah.
cool. Well, thank you guys. It was a fun and fascinating and interesting thing to study, and I feel like I don't fully get it yet, if that makes sense. But that, so it's basically what y'all are saying. It's a work in progress, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, anywho's, it has been real. It's been a party. We absolutely loved doing this episode again. What a banger coming back with an hour and a half, huh? After such a long
Mm-hmm.
hiatus. And I guess with that, if no one else has anything to say, I'll stop the recording. Ta ta,
Okay.
y'all.
Peace out.
Ciao.